Okay, well, everyone, welcome to our first ever interview with our members. This is a very short series we're doing with members from the Blockchain Association to showcase the skills and experience we have on island. For our first interview, we've got Matt and Marc from Harneys. So guys, can you maybe just give us a very quick little intro about yourselves and how you got into this space first?
First of all, thanks very much for having us on, Petri. It's been an interesting ride being involved in the Blockchain Association from our start a few years ago. I have been a lawyer in the Cayman Islands for a little over 15 years. Prior to that, I was a M&A corporate lawyer in London for about 6 years. My introduction actually to this space, and I'm always brutally honest about this because I feel that's the best policy, was in order to explain to a couple of my colleagues who wouldn't stop talking about blockchain as to why I didn't think it was the future. And so I actually spent, I think it was the best part of about 3 or 4 weeks doing one of the online courses that Princeton offers about decentralized cryptocurrencies, about blockchains, because I really wanted to understand the technology that sits behind all of this. And this goes back to 2016. And having done that course, I then realized that I was entirely incorrect about my initial assessment. But what I did know was, and I think this was my criticism of them, that if you want to be involved in this space in legal services or accounting or other financial services that touch on it, you do really have to understand the underlying technology more than in a passing sense that you could possibly get away with as a normal quote unquote financial services provider. And that extra understanding allows you to run with the flow a little bit more when you're talking to clients, and to appreciate the reality of some of the genuine restrictions on what can be done now, on what might be possible. And it certainly allows us in our role to, for want of a better phrase, sniff out the wrong uns and to distinguish between those projects that look like they've got some sort of genuine rationale behind them and will be something that we want to get involved with, and those projects which sound too good to be true quite often and usually are, and it allows us to skirt around them and avoid getting ourselves in hot water with those guys.
Perfect, thanks. Marc?
I've got a fairly unorthodox introduction into this space. I heard of Bitcoin in passing when I was living in Burma in 2012, and the expats there were doing some interesting things with it. Decided not to get involved at the time, probably one of my regrets in life. And then in 2016, I moved to Guernsey to work for a firm there. And this was just as things were really starting to get started in this space. The ICOs were starting to ramp up. Northern Trust had released a DLT-based offering, which was gaining a lot of interest. And people were starting to think more and more about what this technology could allow people to do, not just in terms of financial services, but other use cases and applications. And I found ICOs in particular very interesting, not necessarily from a profitability perspective, but from a technical perspective as to how the crowdfunding contracts worked, for example. And so I, very similar to Matt, I embarked on a course of self-learning and decided to really learn how to code in Solidity so I could work out how the smart contracts worked mechanically. And then as I read through some of the white papers and the projects, I became very interested in just exactly what these things do, or at least what it's proposed they do, and some of the legal and regulatory issues that come up with some of these proposed projects. I then moved to London in 2018 and worked in the fintech space there and started to look more at the legal and policy development around this space. And now I came over to Cayman in March this year. Very interesting time with COVID and everything else going on. But I came primarily because I really wanted to get involved in more of the offshore work generally, but also Cayman already had a reputation as being the jurisdiction where most of the crypto asset funds are based, for example. And as an offshore jurisdiction, a lot of flexibility and innovation around financial services, which has led to its global positioning in the wider financial services space. So it was a very good opportunity. Harneys is an excellent firm to join from the perspective I've had so far, because it was one of the early movers in this space, which I'm sure Matt will talk about shortly, and really does seem to be cementing its position in terms of what it can offer to people looking to be involved in virtual assets in a professional or financial services capacity.
Perfect. Thank you very much, guys. I mean, that's some really good experience and teaching yourself exactly how it works. Matt, you mentioned sort of working with your clients, figuring out how everything works and understanding it. What are some of the services that Harneys provide to clients, and how do you work with them?
First and foremost, we're a global offshore law firm. And as Marc mentioned, somewhat by mistake, I think we fell into this in 2016-17 through relationships that we had with funds law firms on the west coast of the US. And through the period to date, so the last 4 years, we've acted for a large number of crypto asset funds in their formation, operation, and how they've been running during that period. So that's one of our key areas. Also during that time, obviously, like most law firms offshore, we did get involved in a number of token offerings and ICOs that were going on, some more successful than others. And now looking at the current offering, what we're seeing is a maturity in the market. And with the foundation companies law that was introduced in 2017, there's now a genuine opportunity for firms to use interesting vehicles to form and get their projects off the ground. One of the more interesting ones that we've been involved with was establishing the Dash Investment Foundation, which you can find on Google. There's lots of information out there about it, with the idea that the foundation has a role to play in promoting the network. And that's been established in Cayman using the foundation company model, which is an interesting one to use.
Okay, well, that's very interesting, and it's great to know that we're helping projects out there. Marc, you mentioned you've got a mixed background from multiple places. You mentioned Cayman has the majority of the crypto funds at the moment. Why would you say Cayman is actually a good jurisdiction for crypto companies and funds to set up in?
I think first and foremost, the positioning of this jurisdiction in the global financial services marketplace as a very well regulated and highly serviced jurisdiction in terms of the array of professionals who can help somebody use this jurisdiction to meet their needs or to set up a fund or some sort of offering. You've got a reputation for innovation here, which doesn't necessarily compromise on the hard work that's been done to build this jurisdiction up and position itself in the way that it has. And in a way, I think that lends seamlessly to the types of projects and funds and offerings and all sorts of things going on in the virtual asset space, which are aligned with the position that Cayman has as a jurisdiction and wants to maintain. And therefore, I think there's a lot of thought that's gone into the structuring of the upcoming legal and regulatory framework around virtual assets. And you've already got on the ground people with a lot of experience more generally in this space, but also in wider financial services as a more wider offering. And so what I think is Cayman already has that reputation. It's also, as with most small offshore jurisdictions, it's got the flexibility and agility to be able to spot potential opportunities, to react quickly to put in place a legal and regulatory framework, but in a way that's considered and doesn't compromise on what's important to this jurisdiction. And I think all those factors together, as well as its physical location close to the US, its wider positioning within the offshore markets, really does lend itself well to the right type of lends itself well to the right type of virtual asset services that want to set up operations here or potentially even re-domicile here. And they'll find a regulatory framework that's accommodative and developing, and professional infrastructure that will allow them to meet their legal and regulatory requirements as well as service their business needs here.
Perfect, I agree 100%. So to wrap this up, I wanted to find out, Marc, you haven't been here this long, so I won't ask you this question. Matt, you've been here for a few years. For people who are considering coming to Cayman, who might want to move here, what do you think is one of the things that might actually surprise them when they come here?
You asked me this, and I've been thinking long and hard about it. I want to give you an answer that's slightly technologically focused, and I think I would just say the connectivity that we have from a broadband perspective is actually remarkable in a lot of senses. And this was definitely highlighted during the particularly hard lockdown and curfew that we've had in Cayman until about to a couple of months ago. And if you compare it to a lot of other places that people might be looking to be working remotely over the course of this period, certainly my experience of broadband connections and connectivity in parts of the UK, for example, is fairly woeful. Whereas in almost every part of Cayman, you can, if you want to, get broadband speeds that are well in advance of what you might see onshore. Of course, there's a cost element to that, but the reality is that most of us in our homes can get connections between 50 and 200 megabits, no problem at all. And that's actually something that may surprise people when they're thinking about a Caribbean nation that would not necessarily spring first to mind, and it's technologically focused.
Yep. No, that's perfect. I have to say, I mean, I haven't had any issues with video calls and working remotely from here. So guys, thank you very much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Where's the best place for people to get in touch and find out more about what you guys are doing?
Harneys.com.
Perfect. So nice and easy. Just harneys.com. Guys, appreciate it.
Thanks, Petri.